G'day and welcome to another episode of Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown. And today you may see there are a couple of new faces with me straight off the bat, and that is Mr. Brett McKay and Mr. Harry Jones. And welcome to you both from the 8-9 combo, the pod and YouTube combination, really, that you guys preview and do so well for rugby all around the world, whether it's all the way over in Dallas in the US or here in Australia and flying the flag in the capital. It is a awesome combo. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, the last time I spoke to Harry, he was on an island somewhere, so it's nice to see he's indoors. I was actually just trying to compete here, but that's not quite the same, is it?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ferg.
Yeah,
I like the title of your pod, by the way. It's very topical, what with crucial ligaments being busted because of ruck work by the Irish.
yeah.
And I think for sure this is going to be a topic that will be discussed because anytime any sport loses one of its main figures, there's always a response.
Yep.
We'll be getting into all kinds of Six Nations business at the very end, but we are an Australian-based podcast, vodcast, YouTube channel, so we'll be discussing all things Super Rugby Pacific, and that is why I have got you two fine gentlemen on the podcast so that we can discuss what happened and do a review of round four. But just before we get to that, I believe that Harry, you're joining us from the America Bean, as Mr. Donald Trump calls it, or possibly the Caribbean, the Mexican. Did you say Riviera? Was that correct?
Yeah, the Mayan Riviera. It's the top part of the peninsula called Quintana Roo, and where you have Cozumel and Cancun.
Some people can podcast from their own living room. That is the benefit, but it also other benefits means that you can podcast from the Mayan Riviera or your backyard if you're Brett McKay. So
Someone podcast from their living room every week, mate.
but without further ado, let's get straight into the rugby review, and that's on the other side of this. We saw that in the Ireland test, we saw that in the England test. It was a really tight game. And so I'll whack it up there. There it is. Now there's a little bit of chat about the fact that if you're needing to get creative, like, get subscribe, you know the rest. Round four was another round of Super Rugby Pacific, which delivered the goods. But in this round, it was specifically the round of upsets. There have been extremely close games, but I think it's fair to say, and I think you'd both agree, that in previous weeks, if someone outside of the rugby ecosystem that is embedded into this, they would probably say that it's remained status quo. But now, it was really something that has shaken up even those who are looking from the outside in. And so I just want to start. I mean, it's not chronological, so forgive me for those who like their lives in order, but we're going to start with the Brumbies in Auckland because they are just blowing expectations out of the water. Who would have thought that they would have headed over to the Eden Park Fortress and broken a hoodoo, which has been there for longer than a decade? It's been there for 12 years since 2013. I'll go to you first, Brett, since you are reporting from the capital. What did you make of the upset win, and how did you see that kind of reflecting on their coach, Stephen Larkham?
Oh, you could certainly see the pride in Stephen straight after the game, and whether they were tears in his eyes or not. I'm sure that question will be put to him this week, and I look forward to doing that. Um, it was a win for the ages, to use the well-worn cliche. I mean, Stephen himself only won at Eden Park once as a Brumby. Actually, might have been more than that. Only a handful of times is my point. This playing group had never won there. They'd come awfully close a couple of times, most famously a semi-final only a couple of years ago when Luke Reimer still goes on about being robbed of a ruck pilfer that he was clearly on top of. But to actually get themselves in a position this time around where they could scrum for penalty in front of the post, get the penalty, kick the goal, shut it down for the last 90 seconds, exactly as the Force did to them only a few weeks ago. Considering the way that the Brumbies had been playing over the first three rounds, this was a big turnaround performance. But this is one of those wins where this playing group can look back on in a month's time, in 2 months' time, in 2 years' time, and go, remember that? We did it all at Eden Park, so we can do this anywhere. So this is one of those wins that has implications far further than just the 4 points on the competition table.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that, as you say, it will be something that they can draw back on. And that's something that I wrote in my piece on Rugby Pass this week, is that, is this the point, the turning point, or the point where they say that the start of their finals push began, because it is a statement win. And then, Harry, I'd like to come with you with a slightly different angle, is that you have the Harry and index going. And I'd like you, before you answer, to repeat what your slogan or what your subtext to that is, for all those viewers out there. But how do you think that the Brumbies or top Super Rugby teams perhaps feature in that index currently, and then also especially because the Brumbies were so good at taking the Blues in the forwards game, which is something that the Northern Hemisphere are very prided on and do very well, whether it's the English Prem or the top 14.
This will be
Yeah,
good.
that's a really good point about the how of the victory and the belief factor. I actually think this is a victory for the belief, not just of the Brumbies themselves, who, were a Final Four team, and you wouldn't really usually say that a Final Four team who then in the next season beats the champion who's got a bit of a slide going on. That's not normally what you would think. But the history says, no, you really do go to Eden Park to lose. Everyone does at every level. I'm imagining even at schools rugby. So it's super important for the Brumbies to call upon that. It's super important for the competition because volatility in the competition is puts bombs in seats. It makes excitement, jeopardy. The idea that anyone could win at any given time is cornerstone to this type of competition. Not across the whole world, but in this particular New Zealand, Australia, Fiji alliance, it's super important that it's not inevitable. That you say, oh, well, Brumbies go to Eden Park,
Mm.
that's going to end. That's death for a competition. It doesn't even bring people out in Auckland to come see it. So
Yeah.
this actually enlivens the competition. The third thing is, yeah, I do this Harry Index because there's a paucity of league to league competition variables where we can look at things and say, extrapolating the top, bottom, and medium. Everyone can say it's impossible to compare the medium of the middle of the top 14 to the middle of the ERC to the middle of the Super Rugby, and that's true. But you can compare tops and you can compare bottoms pretty easily. Um, Partly because in the top 14 you have relegation issues. But in Super Rugby, there's been this problem of could we bring the bottom up enough that it would help the teams like Crusaders, who for obviously one of the best teams in the world for a decade. Lately, it's been interesting because you just keep wondering, are there too many easy beats? Too many easy, like, go ahead and fill in on your super brew or whatever. And I think this season is maybe the first one where I don't know about you guys, but when I'm filling in my next brackets for the next week, I have no idea now. I'm
Yeah.
starting to go, well, I just don't know.
Yeah,
Very much
yeah, and
so.
that's the important. That's the important bit, John. John, that it is in 4 rounds already. Super Rugby Pacific has become so unpredictable. It's, Harry and I got 5 from 5 last week in our tipping, and I don't know about you this weekend, mate, but I got two. So
Yeah.
like this is exactly that unpredictability. Just the point. Go back to that point on Eden Park. The Blues hadn't lost to anyone at Eden Park very much in the last few years, and the Brumbies know about that because they've only now lost a second time at Canberra Stadium in 2.5 seasons themselves to the Force a couple of weeks ago. So the idea of turning your home ground into a fortress is big for a lot of teams in Super. Everyone wants to do it because if you can win all or most of your away team, your home game, sorry, you're almost there in finals. It's going to be a little bit different this year. The finals format has changed. Only 6 teams will go through. But if you can win all of your home games, you're well and truly on the way. So being able to take 4 points from or away from the Blues is incredibly important come the back end of the year, no doubt.
And I think that is a great segue into the next part, which I want to talk on the wins by Fiji Drua and Moana Pacifica, who both won at home. And obviously, the Fiji and Drua lost their first home game to the Brumbies in round one, which was a big upset. But nevertheless, it was perhaps something that someone looking from the outside in perhaps would have expected, the pride and joy of Australia winning in Fiji. But nevertheless, we know how hard and difficult it is for teams to win away in Fiji. But I think that the wins for particularly Moana is so exhilarating and so exciting for the competition. And it's not only because Artie Savia is there, but it is because the side under Tana Umanga this year looks like a side that actually understands who they are as a team and as individuals. So I'll go first to you, Brett, seeing as you're kind of flying between all over Pacific regions and in Caribbeans and different oceans. So what are you seeing from sides like Fiji and Drua and the Moana Pacifica, whether it's specifically in this game or overall in the season?
Well, the Drew have always been hard to beat at home. There's no whether that's in Suva or whether it's at Lautoka as they beat the Chiefs this weekend. Their records at both grounds are really imposing. Add to that the almost monsoonal type rain that hit Lautoka and that part of the Fijian island. The morning and just as kickoff was on, there's a great image of the Drua doing their bully, and in the background it's just umbrellas as far as you can see it, but the hill's still packed. So for them to be able to master the conditions a lot quicker than the Chiefs did, certainly put them ahead. And I think the Chiefs, the heat, the humidity, the conditions, and all that, it definitely took a toll on them. And that's Fiji playing to their conditions, playing to their strengths. So that's great to see. Going to Fiji should be hard. That should be the idea of putting them into Super Rugby. It should be hard for everyone. And they've claimed some scalps on home soil already over their first couple of years. Moana's win over the Hurricanes, and it's the second time they've beaten them. That might even be more important this year in that it feels like it really has been coming for 3 rounds. They were the leading try scorer in the competition going into this round, and they've been overtaken now by, I can't think who it might be, but they've been scoring points. They've been finding points without any trouble. The issue has been their defence, no question about that. But they have been showing signs that they're muscling up this season, and that's been the big difference for me. Their defense looks a lot more solid. They're definitely going at the breakdown harder, and it had an impact against the Hurricanes, who, when they started losing the breakdown contest, other things started unraveling, and they came back late in the game. They scored a couple of late tries to bring that scoreline back, but they were well beaten by Moana. And same thing again now. It means that going to Albany, going to wherever Moana are going to play, where they are starting to bring the crowd into the contest, they're going to be hard to beat as well. And they've always had that ability in them. I think it was just a matter of harnessing the natural talent. And there's probably no one better to do that for Pacifica players than Tana Umaga and Artie Savia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And from what you're seeing, Harry, I think we saw a weekend of where the number 10 jersey in particular was very important, whether it was Six Nations or whether it was Super Rugby Pacific. Someone like Pellegrini, who stepped up at number 10 for Moana, and you've got Isaiah Armstrong Ravula as well. Sorry, Harry, what are you seeing? What is the key aspect of a number 10 in Super Rugby Pacific at the moment? Because I think it might have shifted a little bit, or perhaps it's just a different type of games play that particularly Fiji and Moana are playing.
Well, first of all, let's comment that Patrick Pellegrini has the all-time best fly-off name. It suggests an immediate tie into some kind of brand. It sounds like a drink. It sounds like a bird. It just sounds smart. It doesn't sound like a guy who's going to have muddy pants. No, a 10 in Super Rugby Pacific is actually vital for a couple of reasons. One, the amount of time that the ball is fed to 10 exceeds the other leagues. Number two, because of the lack of what I'll call full out, hammer blow rush defenses that separate and blitz, you usually play through an off of 10. And there is a certain amount of just real estate that seems to be affordable to someone who can get there. And I think the quickness, not just the quickness of the pass, but the catch, yeah, the actual, like, get rid of it. I think anyone who can do that and then have hesitations, do some skips, is just in the driver's seat. I think it's actually been a weird time for New Zealand-based teams lately, in that we haven't seen this sort of glut, this excess of number 10s that are just killing it. And so this year is actually interesting to see some young blood come in. There's probably 3 or 4 fly-offs that we want to watch for a while and see if they can handle the pressure. I think Super Rugby Pacific is deriving itself a brand that's separate and apart. And we can joke about, what their style is, if it's too quick and too rushed, but it is what it is. So you better have a 10 who can steer you around the
Yep.
field.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so I'll go back to you, Harry, onto the next point, and I just brief answer on this. Obviously, the Waratahs got a pretty convincing win over the Western Force. We know that they haven't typically traveled well in recent seasons, but they did beat the Brums. So are the Waratahs under Dan McKellar the real deal in 2025, or is it still too soon for them?
Too soon to actually probably make a verdict on that, but they're harder to beat. And I think there's a process where you go from losing a lot of close matches, mangling a lot of really good opportunities. The next step is not to go ahead and be this great team that's top four. It's literally that next step is incremental, which is, and now I'll start winning a lot of matches that I probably shouldn't have, and I'll stay in the fight and I'll just become a difficult team to beat. And I think so. I think the verdict is in on that, which is they are
Okay.
better and harder to beat in 2025.
Their set piece is a lot better, John. You can see the Dan McKellar hallmarks there. Their set piece is pretty solid already. They've got a good breakdown, got a good line out maul. They've got those elements there, and then they are then going off the back of that. They are going harder at the breakdown as well. So they're laying the fundamentals, if you like. They're laying the foundations to be able to build off that. Interestingly, talking about tens, fly half and their midfield connection is probably the one area that the Waratahs are still lacking a bit. And they played Lawson Crichton there on the weekend. Tane Edmed come off the bench. Neither have sort of been able to unleash what is actually a pretty handy looking back line out there. And when they do that, when they start finding that midfield connection and they can start feeding the back three and Joseph Suaalii wherever he comes back into it, that's when we'll start having the conversation about the Waratahs as to whether they're back, baby.
Yeah, and I think that is a really pertinent point, is that it's a very Dan McKellar-esque Waratahs looking side
Yeah.
at the moment. I feel like my cat hasn't fully got his fingerprints over the side, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that more hopefully because I don't want his sole fingerprints or blueprint to be the kicking game which they've deployed in previous weeks and also at the weekend to no effect
Mm.
and actually quite poor execution. So I'm reticent to say anything about the backs yet because I'm hoping that it is just not quite there yet. But as Brett, you pointed out, and it's something that I've written about on the Raw and Rugby Pass, it's not looking smooth. It's looking clunky, and that is not what you should expect or McKellar should expect from a side stacked with Wallabies throughout,
Mm.
especially in the back line. So on the Waratahs, not convincing is what I get from both of you. Not convincing yet, but it's too soon to call, which I think is a fair call to make.
More convincing than they were a month ago. I'll say that.
Very true. Not hard to be. We got to set the bar somewhere. Um, and then we'll go on to say the Force and Reds disappointing for different reasons. I think the Reds disappointing so because they didn't meet expectation, which I think was completely fairly put in them. And then the Western Force, you have to have an off game sometime. They haven't had a bye yet, and going to Sydney to play the Waratahs after the last couple of weeks of traveling. I know that that's what they've signed themselves up for, but nevertheless, it is a factor which impacts sides as well. So, Harry, why were they disappointing and because honestly the Western Force maybe went over with a better form of the Waratahs and Force, so that's maybe an upset
Mhm.
there. And then the Reds have definitely had better form than the Crusaders, considering their wins and perhaps the games that they've played. Maybe that was the upset there as well, because I think a lot of people on either side of the ditch and across the Pacific were probably punting on the Reds. So why were they disappointing from your point of view?
I mean, the similarity between both those teams on this performance is they lacked control. They didn't seem to be able to wrest control back from an ascendant opponent.
Yeah.
And that's the mark of a team that's really trying to figure out problems and problem solving inside the match. It's like the old adage that Sir Nick Faldo gives, which is a lot of really good strapping athletes can smack a ball as far as we can, the pros. But what we can do, Nick Faldo says, is we can problem solve in the middle of our round, in the middle of our swing, and we can tweak it and go, that's why I'm not getting it down to the proper position. I felt like the Force got to a point in that game where they just went, I don't know. I mean, I literally
Yeah,
felt like an I don't know game. The Reds, they're so talented. They have a lot of good things going for them, but when up against that kind of opponent, you're going to have to do something extremely different. And I kind of wondered about, even though it's some good plays, I did like some of the offloading, Harry Wilson doing some pretty cool and innovative offloading. Um, I think if you're up against Will Jordan in that kind of mood, I'm getting my Jordans confused. Um, you can fall into a trap, and
yeah.
in that kind of match, they might have needed to get much more tight and restrictive and make things happen in certain places. So I
And
just wonder about their solutions.
yeah, and Brett, just before you jump in on the Western Force and the Reds, I'd like to make 2 points, which is number one, I feel your point about the Western Force about not having an answer was very accurate for the Reds as well, because they played the same game plan and it wasn't working. And I think that's the definition of insanity. And and also to your point, they actually didn't go over there with the level of respect that they should have. It's still the Crusaders, it's still Christchurch. It felt like a lack of respect to be able to think we can run through the Crusaders willy-nilly. And then in regards to getting your Jordans mixed up, I think the gaff from the weekend is actually Matt Burke on Saturday night calling Antoine Dupont Andre in the coverage. He came back and corrected it, but I'm
Andre
imagining
Dupont.
someone like Steve Lenthal putting Andre 3000's body with Antoine Dupont's face. Like I think that's something that would sit within his realm.
I'm pretty
And
sure
he's
that's
cool
in
and
progress.
Andre or Antoine
He's,
Dupont is cool enough to be able to pull off an Andre 3000 outfit. I think he's a bit of a fashion model nowadays. But yeah, so Brett, just going to you, Force and Reds, disappointing weekend for them. What did you make of them? Just briefly.
yeah, the Force were disappointing, no doubt. Yeah, hard to put the finger because they were so different in Sydney to the way they played the first couple of rounds, and particularly the round two in Canberra where they did beat the Brumbies. The way that they were able to get themselves back into that game and rest the momentum that you speak of, Harry, they just couldn't do that this week. And so yeah, they looked a bit off. And there was little elements, Ben Donaldson was 18 from 18 off the tee and suddenly missed three kicks for the night and didn't land one. So little things were just sort of going astray for them. Queensland, I think we're in a funny sort of situation. That result to me was born out of two competing angles for it. First of all, the Crusaders in Christchurch on a Sunday afternoon with clear skies and all that, they were always going to be up for that. They were always going to want to be able to reward the crowd that came in to watch them on a Sunday afternoon. Queensland from the other angle of going back to where they won last year, but there's no doubt that their minds would have been on the cyclone situation back in Brisbane and southeast Queensland across the weekend. Yeah, Tom Liner pulled out on the morning of the game for whatever reasons that was. So there would have been a bit of disruption in their preparation, and that's not to give them an excuse for what was still a pretty comprehensive loss, but there was just elements through the game where, as you say, Harry, they couldn't regain the control as they have been able to in recent weeks. But they also looked like they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know how they were going to get it anyway. So, yeah, they were pretty well beaten. I'm not sure that it was a respect thing, but I can understand that their minds might have been elsewhere perhaps. But um, they'll get off. They'll get the lessons from that because that's the sort of game that's a kick in the pants. As much as winning at Eden Park is a statement win, losing a performance like that is a bit of a statement loss that they'll go back to as well.
Yep, no, absolutely. And I think our conversations on 10 is quite pertinent in the Reds camp, just because
Yeah,
briefly before I move on, Harry McLaughlin Phillips is a runner and he's very good at it. He's a tough nugget, but still direction, organization, orchestration, big parts of his game, which a young player needs to learn. And I
yeah.
think that's probably something that they lacked. Someone commented on a stiff breeze being an issue why they didn't kick. I'd hardly believe that a stiff breeze stops professional sides from using it
Uh,
from needing a territorial gain. So I think there was a couple of tactical misplays there which weren't able to be rectified on the fly. Um,
the
then
Crusaders ran into that stiff breeze at some point as well, and
exactly.
you know, it,
Yeah.
it didn't stop them. So no, I don't think that's a factor.
No, exactly. And so, talking about power rankings, I want to ask both of you, and I'll go to you, Harry, first. are the Chiefs still alone at the top of Super Rugby Pacific? And compounding that, can they beat the odds in winning the game after returning from Fiji against the Blues this weekend again, which is another matchup which is crazy. But that seems like a tough way to be able to try to beat those odds.
Well, it's a brave new world, confusing new world, and that it's not clear that there is one dominant team yet. We don't even know until the end of the season whether this Crusaders battering of the Reds might be, par for the course by the end. The Crusaders are back. Maybe the Blues fall off a cliff, and so any win over the Blues is revised as not that insignificant. We don't know yet, right? But I do think that the Chiefs have the only claim at this point to being the leader, the clubhouse leader, the one with a bit of the inside track. But I mean, you would have expected them to handle business. So, yeah, I think they can definitely bounce back from this. They have an all court game. They can play different ways. They're probably the only team right now that can play every way you want to play. They don't I always group things into physical problem, mental problem, spiritual problem. I don't think they have any of those. The Chiefs have
Yep.
no lack of spirit and desire. They seem to be exceptionally motivated by their loss a year ago. They're physically, pace, power, precision, got all that, and so it's just mentals. And yeah, there's some people that sometimes you can miss, but that's part of the competition, especially in the sprint of Super Rugby, which is if someone's out for 4 games in the top 14, that's a tiny percentage. 4 games in the
Yeah.
Super Rugby, I mean, that's you have really lost something. So that'll be the
Out
main thing for the Chiefs to handle is the health.
four games out of 14 is it's a thing, isn't it? Yeah. I think, John. I think the table is actually a pretty accurate reflection at the moment. You've got the Chiefs started well, and they've got the benefit from that. But they're showing signs, and then you've now got 10 teams that have won two, lost, or won or won 2 games.
Waratah's
You know,
supporters are going to say, stop the count.
yeah,
At sitting second.
yeah, 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 and they can try and make that case. But yeah, I think that's all fairly accurate now. Like it is really tight, and so the next month, 6 weeks, by which we get to round 10, and well and truly on the downhill run of the finals. This next 6 weeks is going to be crucial because teams are going to be taking points off each other, and that's going to be like there's going to be double value games in that. So I think the table's pretty reflective at the moment. These next couple of weeks is going to be really, really interesting for the reason that you mentioned. The Chiefs having coming off a Fiji game is not easy for anyone. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how the Chiefs now bounce back and whether the Blues can force an issue of that.
Yeah, and I think before we move on to the final question of this, I'm going to put a bow on Super Rugby Pacific because we're going to touch on Six Nations quickly. Is that, as you say, Brett, the first 4 weeks, one story, the next 4 weeks, another story. And teams like the Brumbies and the Blues have had the toughest run of opposition, respectively. So for the Brumbies to be sitting 2 out of 4, and the Blues sitting at what they are, as you say, not a fair reflection of perhaps where their fortunes are in another 4 weeks or even come finals time. And that's very exciting. And someone like the Reds, who have not actually come out with stellar results, they have had probably one of the easiest runs by Moana Pacifica, Western Force, and then now the Crusaders, which is their first real challenge. So it is going to be really interesting to see how that progresses and how the season unfolds. And then now, kind of the last point that I'm going to link Super Rugby Pacific with the Six Nations is that kicking has been something Super Rugby Pacific sides have done very poorly, very, very poorly. And that I think that was a symptom of something, stress kicking is what I'm going to call it. That is something that I felt that Ireland were actually pretty guilty of in their massive defeat to France at the Aviva. What an incredible game. I was wincing throughout the whole time. France were putting on hits left, right, and center. I was in pain. Please, Harry, your comments first. You predicted this. You said that this was going to be the case. Please go ahead. What did you make
He
of France's
Well,
walloping run?
it's
he
it's
he
very
said it was possible.
interesting.
He said it was possible.
I mean,
Thank you. Use the
my
modesty. I
official
like that.
my
Thank you.
my official predictions, which are in print, said that they would win. Partly because late in the week we had so many people not return from injury, and then and the
Yeah.
day off there was a switch, and that exit game is based on low. When you have Sam Prendergast be your exit man, and you take away his left foot and his safety
Yes.
cushion, there was going to be a problem. But more than that, I just wondered about Ty Furlong not being there. Not so much on Beelum, who's a good scrummer. It was the Clarkson factor. It was the tail end. And the 7-1, it poses really tough questions for the non-7-1. The non-7-1 has to figure out what they do with the workloads, with like their GPS. The GPS is almost, reversed. And so you're almost looking and going, wait, we might need to start substituting earlier. And even though we're
Yeah.
the 6-2, I would say that this is, even though the gaudy score at the end is big and there's lots of numbers, and those were all hard-earned tries and real tries, even interception tries or tries, it was built on that first 8 minutes, 9 minutes,
Yep.
where Ireland was in the red zone, pounding at the door. They've done that so many times to so many teams, and they've always found a way, and they couldn't find a way. France was using their fouls almost like an NBA style, very intelligently. We're gonna keep getting infringed. We're gonna dare you to take the shot. Then you hit the posts. Then you kind of think, "Oh, I'll go to the corner." Then we repel your maul. It was a study in how to survive and soak up and have all your top, starting pack just empty their tanks. And I remember, I think most people who were doing the WhatsApp chat thing we do now with rugby going,
Mhm.
I think Ireland could be in trouble. They had to score during that period. It almost became almost obvious that they were hanging their head and they were getting tired, and it's hard to resource rucks. And they just couldn't get over the hump. And then there was that try that was called back, but it was so ominous because it was 3 seconds and they were under the post. You were like,
Yeah.
ooh, that could happen again. So that's my
Yeah.
take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brett, please, what did you make
Yeah.
of the game?
No, that's all spot on. I think there was always a recognition that France could definitely win it, but the way that they won it and the margins
Mm,
that they won by, that was the
crazy.
thing that everyone's still shaking their heads at. Like, how on earth have they beaten them by, whatever it was? The key stat out of that, you mentioned that first 8-10 minutes, Harry. The key stat that came out of it was after all of that, France had made nearly 50 tackles to none. Ireland had not made a tackle at that point, and they had nothing to show for it. And then France scored their first try only a minute or two later, and so that's when it started becoming, ooh, what's actually going on here? And yeah, there's no doubt Ireland missed low. I think they missed Mac Hansen as well, and without those two outside guys who are actually involved in midfield and involved in ball carrying a lot, they just didn't have their natural shape. Ireland and
Yep.
France just said, we're going to throw everything at you, and you can either stop us or not. And Ireland couldn't. And the Dupont injury was horrible to see, and it's a massive shame that he almost certainly doesn't play rugby again in 2025. But France actually got better after he left. It forced a bit of a rejig in their attack, and they connected with the midfield. They brought their back three into attack more, and then they actually started cutting Ireland apart properly out wide. And then then it went from this could be a problem to, oh, this is actually going to be bad. And yeah, that was the telling moment. I think there was a couple of really telling moments in all of that, and it sets up this last round beautifully now because I mean, could Wales and Scotland, to have an impact here? Are France actually going to win this quite comfortably? Are we in for? Have we still got one more week of surprises in all this now? The whole narrative on the tournament, I think, is. I reckon we've thought it's changed twice, Harry. It might even be more than that. Is there one more change in it yet?
Yeah. No, it was a stellar game, and I'm so happy that that was a way to put a big bow on the weekend. I know that England and Italy played afterwards, but that the quality of that was quarterfinal 2023 World Cup-esque. It
Yeah,
was absolutely
great point.
stellar. And quick comment on this, not I'm just going to say before we have to go and we run out of time that that sort of quality from Ireland, although they were well beaten, is not something that the Wallabies are capable of yet. And that is going to be something that hopefully I'll talk to you guys about in the future in regards to a British and Irish Lions episode, maybe perhaps at the end of the Six Nations. But that is a chat, as Sean Maloney says, that is a chat for another day. Without any more chit chat, we could go on for hours. I just want to thank Mr. Harry Jones and Mr. Brett McKay for coming on from the 8-9 combo. Quick plug from where the people can find you guys at if they want to listen to you guys some more.
Definitely on the socials at 8-9 combo. You find links to our weekend post-mortem that we recorded in the early hours of Monday after that England-Italy game as well. So that's on our YouTube channel, on our socials, or on Harry's and my socials as well. You certainly find it there. And it's obviously wherever everyone pods as well.
Well, gentlemen,
I do the admin.
Yeah, I can tell. Harry looked like, really? Is that where we find? Is that where they find us?
What's our handle?
No, obviously you guys can find us all on X, and I will drop all our links in the description below. But as always, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy your rugby, whether it's here on Off the Rock YouTube channel, which I'm very happy to have the 8-9 combo on this collaboration, or whether it is on the socials or YouTube or pod platforms. Spread the word and continue to love your rugby. And until next time, thank you very much.
Cheers, brother.
Thanks, mate.